talk about this mega poll because I think even Labour hardliners will be shocked to see that if there was an election tomorrow, not only would they lose their majority, but they would lose 200 seats and possibly more. Incredible.
Yeah, absolutely right. No, I mean, it's highly encouraging for everybody who believes in the future of this country and wants it to succeed.
Yeah.
It's only been 6 months or so since Labour have got in, and even a kind of hardcore partisan like me didn't believe it would be this bad this fast. I mean, really, it's to the point where it's not even funny. It is the country that's really suffering, and all the kind of political point scoring that the Conservatives could be making, that Reform could be making, anybody else, it is just disastrous to see how badly it's gone, and I think the polls really reflect that. I think the really interesting thing about it is that Kemi Badenoch hasn't had an awful long time in as leader of His Majesty's most loyal opposition yet. You've got Reform, who are still, let's be honest, working out what it is they really believe. They did very well in the election, but you've got 5 MPs there who probably think all quite different things about different issues. So the kind of united opposition isn't really there yet, and yet Labour are still facing catastrophic losses. I guess the big question is, if that result were to happen in 4 years' time, I don't think it will. I think it'll be even worse for Labour by a long way. The question is probably what happens to the Reform and Conservative votes. But if it doesn't, if it stays like that, what do Reform and the Conservatives do? Because unless they've got some kind of agreement before or after an election, it's the only way that you could see slimy Sir Keir Starmer get back into number 10.
Well, this is the thing, and I mean, there are some parts of the Conservative Party that still don't seem to quite get the fact that Reform is here to stay, that it's not just a sort of, you know, a fly-by-night operation. They're building something, and they're building it rather cleverly, and they're building it slowly and surely, you know. So the idea that I've seen some former Tory MPs over the weekend kind of dismissing anyone who wants to vote Reform and saying, well, if you vote Reform, you're just going to let Labour back in. So you can't do that. You must vote for us. Well, no, actually, because Reform would say, well, maybe it's the other way round. Maybe your wasted vote is a wasted vote for the Tories.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just can't stand that kind of attitude from some of my fellow members of the Conservative Party that says, well, we're the natural party of government. What on earth that stupid, fatuous statement actually means. The kind of arrogance, especially given how, frankly, we governed too many areas of this country for too long over the last 14 years. We've got absolutely no right to talk about that. I think on the point about standing aside or, you know, you're just letting Labour in, I think both parties are probably right. It looks like Reform is set to do very well in Wales. It looks like they're set to do very well in all those red wall seats that Boris and Dominic Cummings and people like that won back in 2019, and that then Rishi Sunak lost 6 months ago or so. Why would the Conservatives mount serious attempts to try and take those sorts of seats when Reform have a great chance of unseating Labour? Meanwhile, the Conservatives have got a hell of a lot of seats in, let's say, the southwest, where I'm from, lots of rural seats that we lost both to the Lib Dems and to the Labour Party. There's 100-odd Labour MPs representing rural communities. I mean, what they're doing to rural communities now, it's absolutely disgraceful. And everybody...
And isn't it interesting? It's interesting as well that many of those Labour MPs in those rural constituencies, when asked to kind of report and comment on what's being done to those rural communities, go very silent. They go very quiet. They don't want to talk about farmers. I mean, I was driving around the M25 yesterday, and you see an awful lot of signs, you know, handmade signs put up by farmers on the side of motorways. You know, hands off our our farms, hands off our inheritance tax, hands off this, that, and the other. You know, don't bite the hand that feeds you. There's an awful lot of anger out there in the rural communities, which I'm sure you know better than anyone.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, I went home back to the countryside for Christmas. There was some bloke in London who said how nice London was, that all the gentrifiers have left for, and he must have misspelled Buckinghamshire because it began with an F. It was very crude. And I have to say, I had a lovely time in Buckinghamshire with an F, because it didn't have all the problems that Labour-run London has had for a long time, like the zombie knife attacks and, you know, children wearing, you know, very young primary school-aged children wearing hijabs and all these sorts of things.
And it wasn't full of, interestingly enough, racists who all seem to live in London these days.
Yeah, exactly right. And, you know, I think that I saw one of the tractors you can see on the screen now leaving one of these protests and driving back up the Kilburn High Road, which is, sorry, I've got the dog barking in the background, another benefit that you don't have in the countryside when you've got a garden to live out into. And you see these sorts of farmers who come up to London town and see just how radically it's changed. It must be quite a radicalising experience for these people to come up there.
Absolutely right. And let's talk as well about... yeah, don't worry. Let's talk as well about the national curriculum that Labour now want to change and probably for the worst. I mean, it's not surprising that we keep hearing from Labour, oh, you know, we're front-loading all the bad news. Well, no, you haven't got any good news. There is no such thing. Now they're talking about basically making the curriculum more diverse. I think we all know what that means. And once again, they're being led around by the nose by the National Association of Head Teachers and all sorts of other, you know, lefty teaching unions who think that, you know, let's get rid of all reference to any kind of history that Britain is ashamed of. Let's now start teaching about diversity and let's get, you know, all white classes talking about things which are not white.
I mean, this is the thing, I think, that more than Ed Miliband's loony energy policies that will completely bankrupt us, I think that what Labour are doing in education is actually the biggest travesty. Because for all the failures of the Conservative government, that failed to fix lots of things, education was an unbelievable success.
Yeah.
Schools have got much, much, much better, notwithstanding the fact that the Tories didn't get some of the evil, horrible, disgusting woke nonsense out in time. You know, at least kids were learning to read and write better than ever before. They were learning to do maths better than ever before. We've still got, you know, great world-class universities, again, the woke nonsense in there notwithstanding, and you know, really impressive achievements in technical education, more apprenticeships and things like that. And this disgrace of a woman, Bridget Phillipson, remember that name, the education secretary, is just a nasty, toxic figure. I really don't have enough nasty words to say about the policies that she's trying to enact. And this latest one today, Shakespeare's not relevant anymore. We shouldn't teach any of these kinds of old white dead men. Instead, we should teach whatever disgusting toxic bile they want to pour into the ears of children. And she couldn't be more wrong about that. With things like William Shakespeare, the greatest writer of all time, that all Britons, no matter your background, no matter your skin colour, we can all unite around and be proud of. My old boss in government was a chap called Nadim Zahawi.
Yes.
He was born in Baghdad and had to flee Baghdad with his family when Saddam Hussein tried to kill him and his family because they were Kurdish. And we know what Saddam did to the Kurds. Own country. He went and gassed them. Nadim came to this country, it welcomed him, and he became as English as anybody else, and then was the member of parliament for Shakespeare, for Stratford-on-Avon. And then he led the vaccine rollout and all these wonderful things. That is an example of somebody assimilating and integrating and understanding beauty and superiority of British culture and British values, and yet that is exactly the kind of stuff that this frankly evil woman wants to get rid of and stop our children learning. It's disgraceful.
It really is absolutely awful. And of course they don't like him because he's the wrong kind of ethnic minority, isn't he? Because he's a Tory. Oh my goodness me. You know, this idea that suddenly everybody who's not white has to be left-wing is so ridiculous and wrong that you'd think they would realise it, but they don't.
No, of course not. And of course, it's not Labour who've ever had any women prime ministers, not Labour who've ever had any ethnic minority prime ministers. Not only did we have Rishi Sunak, we also had Benjamin Disraeli back in the 1870s, who was born Jewish and, of course, had to convert there, but, you know, was very proud. And when attacked by this, he said, yeah, it's true that, you know, but my ancestors were priests in the Temple of Solomon when yours were all still worshipping around Stonehenge. But that was the kind of integration Britain was managing to do before anywhere else. And yet we're told we're uniquely evil and racist. This was the country that ended the transatlantic slave trade at the cost of, you know, tens of thousands of lives and huge amounts of blood and treasure.
Yeah, absolutely.